So today's game, I have to give you a little bit of about a backstory about this game. First, I chose this because it's similar to the Morphe game we looked at last week. It is a Philidor defense, so that makes it a little easier to memorize. Second, it is a miniature. It's a pretty short game. Third, this has a pretty cool motif in here. I found it amusing. And people who saw it, even 50 years ago thought it was one of the better games ever played. However, there's a big caveat. In all likelihood, this game was never played.
What?
Yes.
How?
How indeed. So let me give you a little context. In 1920 in New Orleans, there was a chess club there. This doesn't surprise us. We were in New Orleans last time for Paul Morphy. Well, okay, the opera game was played in Paris, but Paul Morphy was based out of New Orleans. So we returned back to New Orleans in 1920 with Easy Adams, who is not that good of a chess player. He's some people say a master strength. Some people say class C. Class C would be like 1600, 1700-ish. He's not considered a super strong player, but he's playing Carlos Torre Repetto, who was a Mexican master who would later go on to become one of the strongest players in the United States. At this point, supposedly, Carlos Torre is about 16 years old, but the reason that we think that this game wasn't played is because A, White, in other words, Adams, was probably not good enough to actually play this good. Instead, what we think happened is we think... Right, but he was taught, Torre was taught and really sponsored by Adams. So what we think happened, at least Edward Winter, who's a better chess historian than I'll ever be, thinks that, or one plausible explanation is that Torre had seen this in a Skittles game, and just a casual game, had seen a position, and had imagined a better continuation of it, and found a better continuation of it. And so the only way to really get that idea out there was to claim that it happened in a game, and because he was being nice, he said that it was a sponsor/teacher who had introduced the idea and beat him with it. Probably what happened is that Torre Repetto was watching a Skittles game or playing a Skittles game and thought of some brilliant continuation the next day or the day after that, and then decided to create a game out of it to make it seem plausible, okay? To make this idea last forever. And you know what? Whatever the origin, it's pretty sweet, so we're going to take a look at it today. And I have the notation turned off to make it harder and to make you guess the move, because this isn't a game that Warren's already introduced you to, so you haven't seen it before, so we're going to learn as we go. I mentioned it was a Philidor, okay? So this part looks very familiar to us. And I also mentioned that just like Morphy played, 70 years previous or 60 years previous to this game being played, Adams supposedly plays d4. Okay, so we're challenging it much the same way. What was Morphy's next move here? Or what was his opponent? The two counts at the opera, what did they play here?
Knight, bishop,
Right. They sortied the bishop to pen the knight, okay? Anyway, not here. Here we have the much simpler pawn takes. Okay? First decision point for you. Do you recapture with knight or with queen? That's how most modern players would play it. But they captured with the queen. The queen is a fighting piece.
They'll get an extra tempo because they'll just play an exercise.
They'll develop the knight with tempo. Exactly right. And now we have to move our queen. Or do we?
No, we pin the knight with the bishop.
Ah, yes, you can. However, if you pin the knight with the bishop, you have to be resigned to the fact that if your opponent breaks the pin, you're going to have to trade your bishop for a knight. Okay? And that's what happens. Because now the pin is broken, so this queen is en prise again. So we can either move the queen or we can take the knight. Now, Benjamin, you said that that's not that bad. Remember Warren said that a bishop is really closer to 3.5 points and a knight's worth 3. And he said, and he's biased because he loves his bishops, but he said, if you're going to trade your bishop for the knight, you better be getting something out of it. You better be getting some sort of compensation in addition to the trade. Here, it's not clear that white gets that compensation because black can recapture with the bishop, and that's a fine square for the bishop, and it happens to be putting a little pressure on this pawn. Now the queen is actually tied down to the defense of this pawn. So I don't actually agree with you that bringing your bishop out to pin the knight, I don't know that it was a wise idea. Maybe you could say that the compensation somehow is to being able to castle quicker. But anyway. Okay, so we bring this bishop out, and the pawn is protected for now. And white needs to come up with a couple of, white needs to develop, right? No, he needs to find spaces for the bishop, find spaces for the knight, castle. These are all things that white's going to want to do over the next couple of moves, right? Black is going to need to do something similar. Black's going to want a castle. You have the option, queenside castling is going to be a little quicker here, but a little more risky, so you have to think about kingside castling, which means developing these pieces. And unfortunately, this bishop only has the one option to develop itself to, unless you want to play a move like this. So these are things you should be thinking about, long-term goals for each side. But white is developing a knight, okay? Reinforces, now the queen's no longer tied down to the defense of this pawn. And we're developing. These are all good things. Black also is going to develop a knight. Now we have a second attacker on this pawn, so we actually do commit the queen to defending the pawn again. Unless we want to sack the pawn. Now we're just going to castle. This is another thing that we needed to do, right? Here's another thing that black needed to do. And now here's an interesting idea. White is going to defend this pawn by breaking up this line of sight, right? This communication between the opposing bishop and the knight, and say, hey, do you want to take my knight? And if you do, then I'll move my pawn here, and I'll have a nice juicy square to develop my rook to, right? Okay, so we see some plans here. Black says yes, but I'm going to take with the bishop. And white says great. All right, so now materially we're back to equality. If we objectively look at this, we see similar development from both sides. White, you could argue, is maybe a little bit better developed because white is castled, but then again, white has had an extra move at this point. So now we're objectively pretty much even. The only thing is that we have the center pawn, which is currently being defended by the queen. We really need to think about, freeing up our queen to do better things. So we eliminate one of the attackers, potentially, for that pawn, possibly. And black here does not make the strongest move. If you were black in this position, what are some candidate moves that you're considering? H6 to ask a question of the bishop. What else are you thinking?
Honestly, H5 is really the only move, but that's not really a big one because you're staying close to the king side. I would maybe D7.
Knight. No.
Looking at is D7.
Queen.
No, knight D7.
Queen D7? Okay, so you're thinking of like Queen D7, maybe even Queen C8. You're thinking about H6. H5 I don't think is wise. H6 I think is objectively the best move here. All right, now what Torre supposedly played here is not terrible. It's not losing. But I think H6, this idea of H6 and kicking this bishop is actually black's perhaps biggest, I don't want to call it a mistake, but their biggest inaccuracy, at least in this middle game, was not playing H6 somewhere along the way, okay? So instead we play C6, just to try to break down the center pawn. And we say, no, I'm going to keep that center pawn, that advanced pawn, okay? And we say, no, we're going to take it, and then we're going to take it. So now you're starting to think about, this being an open file, right? And thinking about ways to exploit that. You're thinking about the weakness of this advanced pawn, okay? But objectively, we're pretty even. Let's protect this bishop. Why not? Get this rook on a semi-open file. The only thing that's blocking the file is your own piece. That's a good thing. White is going to say, you know what, I'm going to contest your activity on that file. Now we're going to expand a little bit on the queen side, a5. And then White is going to give a little hint as to their long-term plans on their next move. If you're White, what candidate moves jump out to you?
Take knight f6 with bishop.
Take the knight on f6, but then bishop takes, and then bishop is kicking your queen off of this square that you really kind of like. And if bishop kicks the queen off of this diagonal, you really got to worry about this pawn over here. So what else might you be thinking of as White?
Looks like bishop.
Rook takes bishop. There's no clear compensation for that here, sack in the exchange. But I like that you're thinking like Tal or Petrosian here. I'm sorry? Rook c1, you're thinking about getting the rook on this open file. That's a decent idea.
What about rook e3?
Rook to e3, what's your long-term idea there?
Rook e1.
Like this, to double your rooks?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, your idea is pretty much what he played, but he had a minor variation.
Oh.
Okay? He plays rook e2 with an idea of watching this pawn right here, right? That we talked about could be a weakness long term. But yes, he's taking your idea to double up on this e file to really contest the e file. Now Black here plays this move, which we originally look at as objectively good. It's grabbing a hold of this file. But I can tell you that Stockfish will take the engine evaluation from this position to even to about +1. Stockfish considers this move a mistake. Can you think, understanding that White's long-term goal is to double on the e-file, can you think of why Stockfish might consider that a mistake?
Queen a7.
Because Stockfish is thinking of Black playing Queen d7 instead?
No.
Or White playing Queen e7?
Yeah, you can play queen a7 to threaten the pawn and just wait for the pressure.
Oh, Queen a7 attacking this pawn.
Yeah.
Black has an easy response.
Wait, but it doesn't
Well, you can
cover
still
the.
take a pawn.
Yeah.
Oh, this pawn?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that you're really that concerned about that pawn.
I am.
Okay.
Free pawn.
Free pawn.
+1 is
Well, okay, so another option
Turns
for here would be just play the rook back, yeah?
Then you'd be able to take
Then you
big
take this pawn? Okay.
and then
So
further pressure
so
on
now
the
we
ship.
see why
Wow.
Stockfish is evaluating this position as White being up a pawn, right? So this last move was a mistake for Black, and Black instead should have played this move to defend one of these pawns so that the rook could commit to defending the other if in case of need. But Black has more problems long term, and White is about to bring the hurt. Okay? White is about to take this position that was equal and turn it into pure nastiness in a very, very short period. Black now sees that this queen needs to be away, needs to be able to defend this rook without being the first piece to recapture, okay? So Black is sniffing blood in the water and is trying to get this queen the heck out of Dodge and, you know, provide protection for a pawn perhaps. But like I said, bad things are about to happen. So as White, what would you play? I want you to think about this in terms of tension. When I was talking to Timur Gureyev about how he views blindfold chess, he was looking at the intersection of lines of force. The chess pieces represented lines of force, and where they came into conflict, where there was tension, that was the intersection of those lines. So if you were to draw lines of force, for example, you might be tempted to draw a thin line here, okay? To draw a thicker line here because it's doubled, to draw maybe a thicker line on this square because you've got two pieces contesting it, but you have more defense. So think about it in lines of force. Let's see if that visualization works for us. Why?
White knight is how
What would White play here? Take what?
Take the knight.
Why?
Well,
How would black recapture? With pawn or bishop?
if they recapture with pawn, you can check that.
They can't be fixed.
If they recapture with pawn, we're
Oh, yeah.
weakening our king side, yes. But what if they recapture with bishop?
I mean, you just put more pressure.
Oh, if
you just put pressure in the back rank.
You put more pressure on the back rank? Exactly. I like the way you're thinking. So you're thinking this is a concrete plan. If we take the knight with the bishop, we can create more pressure on the back rank. Or we can create more pressure on their king side position. And so that gives us the clue of what move was actually made. See? It's a useful thing to think of your plans and think about where that tension is and think about how to increase it. Okay? So we take with bishop. And you're looking at this and you think, okay, but this is kind of worrisome because now we have to move our queen. So this is the defining, probably brilliancy of this entire game. I want you to take about 2 minutes to think about this, and I'll edit it out of the recorded version, to see if you can come up with the brilliancy here. So let's see if we can get ourselves to the idea. Let's start with Timur's observation that we're attacking the back rank. Jose.
But can we play like, this might sound stupid, but can we play something like Queen E3 or something?
Queen to E3.
Or Queen.
I would think you'd rather do something like Queen G4.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Wow.
What are you saying? Take the bishop.
Or
You guys are good.
Queen.
Oh, we got it. Oh, let's go to.
Yeah, because
Queen G4.
you can't
Yeah,
take
because he can't take it.
Yeah,
Okay.
Queen can't take because then you.
Very, very good.
We're so smart.
Okay, so there's a couple of concepts here. The first concept is immunity, right? We say the queen is immune from capture. Because if queen takes queen, you see the checkmate, right? On the back rank. Rook takes rook, rook takes rook, rook takes rook, mate. Unavoidable, right? So the queen is immune from capture. But the queen does an extra important job because the queen is now, if black does not take, and we've agreed that black cannot take, then this queen has to move. And the queen has to defend this square. Okay? So where's this queen going to move?
D8. Has to.
Yeah.
D8?
Or B's. I mean,
Well, the problem with D8 is rook takes rook, queen takes rook, rook takes queen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're be exchanging a rook for a queen
But
there.
either way,
That's problematic.
we go
Could you put
E7.
some-
So
Either way,
Maybe B.
yeah.
So let's look at the squares, right? If we need to protect this rook, okay, we need to protect this rook. This square is out. This square is out.
B5.
This square is out.
You can go B5, right?
B5. Yes. Now, how do you, as white, continue?
You play A4.
no. Queen
You,
D4.
maybe
Queen
you
takes
can
C8.
take the.
You can,
C-
okay, you can play A4 and your idea?
Queen.
I don't know. What's the-
I don't know. Let's threaten the queen.
You want to throw? Maybe just move up.
Queen
This
takes
sounds a bit
C8.
stupid, but maybe the
Takes
queen
C8.
can take
Okay,
that rook.
queen takes C8 doesn't work. Queen takes C8 is tempting,
Oh.
but it doesn't
Change
work.
the rooks and go into a complicated endgame?
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we have to play A4 because you're still
Oh, it
trying
doesn't
to.
work,
I think you're still trying to the back rank.
No.
Oh, okay.
What?
Oh yeah.
Oh
Again.
my god.
Again, it's not a mate.
Oh, yeah.
Do you see it?
If they take with the rook.
If you take with the queen, it's mate. If you take with the rook, it's also mate.
Oh, that's crazy.
More and more mate.
Well,
Come on, bro.
they
Take my
just gonna go
queen.
back to
Yeah.
B5.
Take my queen, bro. Let's go. Let's
Remember,
dance.
Take the rook, man. Wait.
Aren't
Okay.
they just gonna go back to G7?
Yes, they are.
Wait, oh.
Then
I think
couldn't
that's
it
it.
just end in like
Take rook. Take rook.
I have a question.
Taking the rook doesn't work. Queen takes rook, and then you're fine.
Can you
No,
have
but
one?
so look, if you take rook.
Yeah, and then,
Uh-huh. Rook takes rook.
and then
Then
queen
rook.
take.
Oh, yeah, makes sense. Sorry, I thought queen was take.
Queen takes rook, rook takes rook.
Yeah.
We're fine. All right?
It's gonna be.
If rook takes.
Oh, you play B5. You play queen B5. Why
You
don't
play
just go
queen B5.
Wait, no, that doesn't make sense.
No, it
You
still
made a mistake.
depends. It's still.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, still holds on. Queen takes b5 is winning for black, so
Maybe
Can't beat queen.
now I want you to think of it this way. Think of it this way, okay? Right now, this queen cannot move to any squares and protect the rook, but the queen is not being kicked off this square. You see that? The queen is not being kicked off this square. The queen can't move, but that's okay because the queen doesn't have to move.
Wait, I've got an idea.
Okay? What is it,
Maybe
Benjamin?
the rook- it sounds a bit
Queen
crazy, but
C7.
maybe the rook could attack the queen on
Oh, I have
the
a-
7 up there. Is
Bishop
that
takes.
I haven't really seen
Oh,
that
wait,
yeah.
queen takes.
I forgot that the bishop's there.
Jose?
Oh, queen c7?
Yeah. Queen C. Wait, no. Oh,
Boom!
okay.
How do you like them apples?
I don't know. Oh my god.
And then green apples more.
And
Okay. Now then, where can the queen go?
Again, b5.
Again b5, but now we play the move you were thinking of earlier.
b.
Okay? And then how do we follow it up?
With
Queen
B.
takes. Wait, no.
we
You
play
didn't hear it.
maybe knight d.
Knight?
Too slow.
Yeah. Rook a1?
Rook a1,
No,
queen
no.
takes with
Oh, check, yeah.
yeah, with check. So queen can then dance back up to a4 and be okay.
Rook's e4?
Queen C.
No.
Yes.
Oh, I was right.
Rook e4, very good. We're limiting the queen's squares. Now, can the queen go here?
Yeah, but you play knight.
Okay. Can the queen go here? No.
Oh.
Here, no.
No.
Okay, so we are vastly limiting this queen. So at this point, black is actually utterly lost. If you look at Stockfish, Stockfish says that black should play g4 or g5 here and just give up the queen. Because what follows is worse. This move that we talked about, yeah? And we talked about using the knight.
Yeah.
See if you can find better.
Oh, queen takes b7.
Yes!
Nice. Nice lighting.
Queen takes b7, and we still have the exact same threat. You want to take my bishop? Cool story, you get mated. Or you want to take my rook? Cool story, you get mated. You want to take my queen? Cool story, you get mated.
Full story, bro.
Was there any way to stop this?
No.
Well, you could have played g5 earlier.
Oh.
Its literal existence is.
But at this point, Stockfish will tell you to play g6 or g5 again and just give up your queen.
No. That was wrong.
You could-
F1.
Could you not play something
Wait,
like
no,
bishop,
hold on.
like bishop b7? Oh wait, no. I mean, yeah, no, that wouldn't make sense.
No.
Could we?
No.
Dang it. No.
Okay, so unfortunately, black simply resigns here.
Or did they?
They did. They did.
White is victorious.
There is no sound continuation here for black. Black is just, at best, down a queen, and at worst, getting mated.
Wait.
A full queen.
I like that. That's
What are you going to do?
nothing. Take the L and walk away.